Hi Exiled, enjoyed your video a lot. I wasn't thinking of doing any videos, but when I saw yours it kind of just, I wanted to think about it because I've thought about it a lot as well. I break your question down into 2 or 3 parts. Do shock tactics work? If they do work, are they worth it? Meaning, do they affect enough people? And possibly, if they do work, even if they affect a certain percentage of the religious, does it have an empowering effect, an infuriating effect on the bigger percentage? Because I think we'd all agree that shock tactics may work, but they also may, in a certain sense, in some sense, push away perhaps the majority. I suppose I've answered my question quite a bit. I do think that shock tactics can work, and I do think they affect a certain percentage, but I think it's a small percentage. And as for a negative effect, I think there's a certain, the religious people of all denominations, I think they do imagine us to be subhuman in some sense. I don't think your parody was very far off the way that they see us. And I don't think the most rabid video post is going to really affect that one way or another. They might be infuriated for a few days especially, but in a few weeks to a month, I don't think their impression of atheists would have changed that much. I think if we were all doing videos like that all of the time, then yes, we could be doing a great deal of damage. But once in a while, I don't suppose it hurts. The reason I say it doesn't hurt, and the reason I think that shock tactics do have an effect, is based purely on a phenomenon of, I think, probably the late 60s and perhaps more particularly the 70s. Do you remember the Moonies, run by Sun Moyung Moon? They were a cult, and they were expert brainwashers, and they targeted a lot of wealthy, or rather the children of wealthy parents. And when people tried to get the kids to come back home, they had been brainwashed to such an extent that they utterly detested their parents or the sight of them, or any request made by anyone on the parents' behalves. They were simply unreachable. And so the rich parents hired crews of, I don't know, ex-military, and got them to abduct the children and strap them in a chair in a barn somewhere and try and deconvert them, to rewash their brains. And I know that part of the process was a rational discussion to try and expose it from a calm, rational viewpoint. And I know that much of it was sensitive and caring, and offering not a vacuum, but a friendly face to go to. But I also know that at some point they were right in the faces of the person strapped to the chair. They were screaming in their faces. They were humiliating them. They were taking pictures of Sun Moyung Moon and urinating on them. They were spitting on his photo, tearing his photo. So that there's a point when, you see, I trust these people's professionalism. Their job was to break the kid out of the habit, to break the kid. So they understood that they're professionals, they knew what they were doing, it was their job to do it. And they knew that part of the process involved shock tactics. But I don't know enough about the technique and the order in which they use the approaches. If anyone does know how that runs, I'd be very interested to hear. It might explain something of the way that certain evangelicals work. So shock tactics at the right time on the right person, then they can work. And when they don't work, it won't really make things any worse, as long as we don't all do it. I've just had a horrible thought. What if shock tactics only work on someone who's strapped in a chair? What if shock tactics and humiliating their beliefs isn't the last part in the process? Because if it's not the last part in the process, then we're trying to do it to people who aren't actually strapped in a chair and can simply walk away and undo whatever good the shock may have done. I don't know.